Kia ora everybody, and welcome to Future Whenua Yarns, where words become worlds.
So yeah, we're sticking with it. That's
well, it's a good one for this episode.
That's very true. Yeah. So yeah, back in the saddle, we've done a couple of kind of in-person podcasts recently. So this has been a little while since we've been back here doing an introduction, but good to get back in the swing of things.
Yeah, and just really cool also to have spoken with Cody Tucker of the Hāwea Master Plan. He's the head of the task force that's been doing up a design of how the community can really design their landscape as they develop to a future, or have something to sort of stick towards, so it doesn't go AWOL with sort of large developments, that the people who actually live in this place are really trying to, the lifestyle that they live in Hāwea for.
Yeah, so it's sort of a bottom-up solution as opposed to a top-down, thinking where it's less exploitative and more around the concept of like actually how do we foster and nurture, this from a community basis.
Yeah, it's really just like, what do the people of this community want for their lifestyle and what's important, and then what are just the cool opportunities that are out there that could make for like really awesome lifestyle for those in there.
Yeah, I mean that's a huge part, I think, of how we think about communities in the future. It's not just, what assets need to go where. It's actually like, how do you build, it's sort of, again, it's that ecosystem thinking as opposed to, sort of the more individualist thinking, where it's the relationship between the objects as opposed to the objects themselves that's not necessarily, prominence. But just jumping back for a second, because I don't think we've actually introduced ourselves.
Yeah.
We got a bit excited there for a second.
Well, I'm Zeb.
Yeah, and Rob sitting over the side of the screen. And yeah, so it's been, as I said, a little while since we've been sitting down doing one of these intros, but spring has definitely sprung, to put it simply.
Yeah, it's all happening. The garden's booming, and we've been, all focused during September is on keeping lambs born and alive. So coming to the finish of lambing time, it's been a beautiful September. So pretty good survival and thrival rate. They're growing and booming and having a good time out there.
Yeah, it's kind of incredible how quickly they gain size.
Yeah.
Like they go from being these fragile things to sort of stocky little beasts that are running around causing chaos pretty quickly.
Yeah, they go from a lamb that's pretty easy to catch off the bike to something that you're sprinting after and no chance.
Very true.
They get fast.
But now, jumping back to talking about community plans. Sorry, just had to do a little bit of a detour to kind of reintroduce ourselves. But yeah, I think this is a really important thing, just, in general for communities to be considering moving forwards, is that, you can build this sort of task force or, kind of leadership structure within the community that can start to set, these are actually what we expect moving forwards, not always waiting to be reactive when someone comes along and says, oh, I want to do X, and then, it's up to the community to decide whether they're pro or con. Now it's actually like, no, these are the things we're looking for. These are the projects we're looking to initiate. These are the kind of ethics and morals that we want to associate with our community. And that then starts to sort of filter and define the types of entities that, we'll want to approach. So I think it's a much better model to be proactive.
That's exactly it. And it's like this idea of using future as a verb, that it's futuring. They're designing what they want this landscape to look like. And so it's like a sort of community level, like landscape process, and you're really, using sort of rather than taking some there's leadership out there and we're sort of following and doing what they're told. They're stepping up and they're creating something like, this it's us that creates the future.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really important part of it. And it's just interesting in the plan and the design they have, just how many elements that are sort of directly associated or tangential to the type of topic that we're interested in.
Well, I think that to me is indicative of a very positive change. That now it's actually community-led sort of groups that are saying, no, these are the things we're actually expecting over the next few years. It's sort of that idea of setting an intention. They may not have the funds in place, they may not have the sort of planning mechanisms and the ability to just go out and make all these things happen, but by getting together as a group and saying, this is what we expect out of our community, it sort of sets everyone's mindset around what will be, what will come from that. So I think that's, it is, grasping, sort of taking the reins and actually saying, no, we can be a proactive part of solutions as opposed to just having to get a vote on whether we want it or not.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
and they're doing an awesome job. I think they've consulted, and the event that I first saw Cody at, it was publicly notified, and we just were able to go along, and they had a bunch of the mayoral candidates and other council people running, and they got to speak for 2 minutes. It was a good event, and that's how they introduced this. And we then had a bunch of pin bads and all the different projects that they have mentioned. We got to put a 3, 2 or 1 vote on which we thought was the most important. So and so that's how they're sort of gauging interest on what's important for people is the sticker system, inviting them along and things like this. So
I'm trying very hard not to get on a soapbox about the idea around taxation and sort of, you get to pick what projects you want to put your taxable revenue towards, but we could be here for the next 3 hours if we start talking about that. So we should probably wrap it up and get into the interview portion of things, unless you've got anything else you wanted to.
Absolutely. No, just on that line of what we're thinking, just taking position, stepping up, and making bold decisions and actions that will help guide the future that we're looking for.
Yep, no, absolutely. Perfect note to wrap it up. So we're going to dive into the interview with Cody and Zeb. So don't forget, like, subscribe, and if you really want to support us, there'll be a link on the page right now to go and donate to Future Whenua, which is the charity we started to sort of foster all of these kind of ideas that we're working on. So that's hugely important to us as a sort of young fledgling organisation. So please, any support will be fantastic and massively appreciated. So without further ado, we're going to dive into the interview between Zeb and Cody.
Enjoy.
Cody, what's up, man? Awesome to be connected with you here through Zoom.
Thank you very much for having me. Appreciate it.
Nice. Yeah, I was in Hāwea a few weeks ago and got the notice about a public notification about this Lake Hāwea Master Plan. And so I came along, and it was you presenting this master plan, as I think you're somewhat at the helm of the movement. So, and I was just absolutely impressed. I thought it was a really good meeting. Had some great conversations with people in the community, and it was really intentional about why everyone was there, and just like really coming up with a community-led vision for the area, which is sort of Lake Hāwea and into Lake Hāwea Flat. So I thought that was a great meeting and really great presentation that you made on this plan. So really cool to bring that to the Future Whenua following.
Absolutely. I was stoked to see some diverse faces out there as well. I think like you often have these events and you get the same people showing up. So I really appreciate the effort of coming such a long way to be there too.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, we were hanging out doing some guerrilla gardening actually that day. A couple of folks up there, good hearty Prami folks, and Jake knew about it. So yeah, we thought we'd go along, and absolutely glad that I did. So it would be cool to just get right into quizzing you about what it's all about and everything like this. But I thought if you would be keen to share your screen and just run through a bit of a presentation to start with, and then maybe we can have a bit of a yarn to follow that.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. So here we are, title page. So to give some context, I think we had a Shaping Our Futures event at the end of last year, where as a community we all got together and we facilitated kind of the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and did the whole analysis of our township, the things that we're quite concerned by, the things that we're really proud of, and what we really connect with as a community. And we decided to then we ended up creating a report of a lot of those topics condensed into ideal outcomes, and there are a lot of kind of ideologies about food resilience and connectivity and community and that stuff that we wanted to retain, and the fears a lot were around growth and a lack of communication and control, being that larger forces that were feeling like they were kind of taking over and dictating the future of the township. And so from that event, we ended up creating a task force of volunteers who were all locals, and they were representatives of different aspects of the local community. And we met every few weeks for about 4 or 5 months, I'd say. And then through that meeting, we kind of discussed how we can address some of these issues and what kind of action we can take to better the community, and to take an initiative on solving some of those issues. And then we ended up deciding to do a master plan, which we got some local funding for through the district plan. And this is basically it. So this was co-designed with myself and a landscape architect who's in Hāwea Flat, Erica Gilchrist. She had much more expertise on this kind of stuff. I was chair of that task force and doing some other work in the community. I work as an industrial designer, so I was passionately curious, but maybe less informed with the process of how to go through. And so, yeah, we started tackling it initially through our values and vision, who we're going to create it for, and what is the brief and the framework around the intent with creating this master plan. And a lot of it was basically trying to do it better than what we've seen done before. I think often towns get developed and then they deal with the issues as they come up, and you get to a point where there's so much that's already happened that there's a lack of foresight into creating the fundamental infrastructure, social infrastructure, I should say, that keeps a community well connected. And so we were wanting to attack this kind of a bit early, being that Hāwea is still a young, small town, in order to protect the environment and retain equity and inclusivity and rich culture and community, and create resilience from the potential of earthquakes, and have a better representation of Māori in the area, and ensure that we are addressing the concerns of the community. So we created this big report, which tackles environmental stuff, the people of the place. And so we had a look at the numbers of the projected growth, which seems to always be incorrect. And I think a lot of the people showed an appetite for wanting to have a larger plan. And so we decided on 50 years, just because it's typically 30 or less. And a lot of the issues that we felt kept coming up was just a lack of foresight, and, preparing for too little, and then getting the tidal wave of growth and tourism and all that other stuff coming and changing it out of our control. So we had, I'll just skip through so that we can kind of get to some of the plans and the projects. So looking at utilities, the waste and sanitation, the energy restraints, and also kind of like the best way to front foot transitioning to sustainable renewables. Some of the lacking of infrastructure for medical, which created some unequitable stuff. Basically, old people couldn't get to the facilities they needed to in time, and medical is kind of an issue for all of Queenstown Lakes, to be fair. And then some of the opportunities around recreation and landscape supply, housing accommodation. So we're looking at affordability, which is a big thing at the moment. Also building practices. So there's a lot of building waste. We're rapidly scaling as a community, and so there's lots of new builds going on. Passive house building practices, and also building for resilience, as well as seasonal accommodation and visitors. So how we locate where the people stay for short and long periods of time, how that connects them into the culture and the community, and the rural and the outskirts of the density of township as well. Some of the economy. So we basically have 6 commercial spaces for over 120 businesses that work remotely, basically from Hāwea. And that's just out of their garage or home or remote professionals kind of thing. And so there's a lot of people that could scale up if we gave them the space, a lot of work that could be shared, and more collaboration that could happen if there was areas for people to connect and to build together rather than in isolation. And so there is some projects to address that. The movement around the town. So because we're lacking in infrastructure, we rely heavily on Wanaka. And so it was about the public transport routes, trying to create a good key network in and out of the town, alternatives to get out if there were disasters on any of the bridges. Also trying to keep some roads high flow traffic and then some other ones low flow, rather than in future having to reduce the speed limits. Looking into how we can kind of front foot a lot of those issues by creating better roading networks. And then a big part of that obviously is cycleways and footpaths, so that passive movement is prioritized and a more enjoyable and efficient way of getting around town, so that it is incentivized to do so. We had a look at design guides. So the work that I've been doing is in the signage, which the latest concept is that one. So how that kind of emanates into the rest of the township, and what we want to say with our cultural identity, and how we reference that, the materials that we use, the longevity of it, and so forth. And so, yeah, this is the master plan concept from a map point of view. We have about 6 different maps, and they all identify different things. So in the pink is the urban area that we deem appropriate for growth. It's far larger than what the current township is, which probably sits around here. And that's because a lot of times people go, well, that's not enough growth for 50 years, and who knows what's going to happen in 50 years. I think what we wanted to do is show where we had a floodplain, which was going to make it difficult to build on, but also on the eastern side of this is quite good soil. And where we've identified in the pink, there is a riverbed kind of rock. So easier to build houses on, not as good for building, for planting and food, supposedly. And so whether that, can be condensed in a way so that it retains that rural character and ensures that there is still a healthy farming network surrounding it, to supply the township inside the growth boundary. The next one is identifying cultural and, intersections, essentially. So these are areas where either there's a roading intersection, and so as an entrance into the town, the intersection into Lake Hāwea, into Hāwea Flat, that might create some opportunity for commercial space, given that people would be on their way home from Wanaka, say, and would stop off there on their way home. Some bigger, more cultural intersections. So those are places where we meet as a community and can build some social infrastructure. And then some other key networks like a main township. So where it's most equitable and where we've identified the epicenter of where all the population lies, in both townships. And then potential for industrial area, and just actually putting on the map outstanding natural landscape, rural character, and all those other features. This is the roading that we've seen before, and these are some typicals around about what you'd expect for the amount of parks that were needed within a certain radius of housing that was built as it grew. And then this is in more detail around integrating some of the ideas. And so I think one of the core ideas that we had recognized is that we had a large space called the domain, which is centered between Lake Hāwea and Hāwea Flat. And that's a huge public area that is currently a racetrack, and there's a food forest right next to it, which we can utilize as a community. But what's also great is that there's a floodplain that connects that asset to the lake, and can also connect it to the flat. And so we looked at creating a carbon farm in order to create that linkage, build plants in that area that was otherwise typically hard to build in, create a network of green space that bordered the urban area, so that people always felt connected to the assets of the lake and the domain, and had a safe, passive way of moving through. Also, so we can offset emissions from tourism and from building. And within that boundary as well, it just gives reason for space, like sports fields and community gardens, detention ponds, and the sorts. And so, yeah, the projects that were coming out of this there's quite a few, and they're kind of just there so that we can identify how people connect with them and what people deem as important. We've created some surveys to the public to try and get some involvement involvement with where they see is most need, what they're most excited by, and then try and create like a hierarchy of needs in that respect. So the domain could share in future recreational space, so sports fields and potentially rec centre and events, amphitheatre, that kind of stuff. The town centre, just the aesthetic of how that looks and feels with the Alpine region, how it connects. The big one and probably the most exciting for a lot of us is the market square. So this is based off the Shellfair markets, where they have a pavilion with some stall area so that on a Sunday you can all go and trade fruits and veggies, and that's part of like the food resilience. It's enriching community. It gets people together, and that whole kind of free trade aspect of it. Sports fields, obviously another great connector of people and relationships. Primary school, which is already in talks with the Ministry of Education, and there's a lot of local involvement around the existing one because it has a long history and residents are really connected to it. And so we're trying to identify and have that conversation now, so that we can really get an understanding of what the community needs and wants are for the long term. Cycleways, as I said before, so we're setting kind of a precedent of the gold standard that's 3 meters wide so that it's bidirectional and sealed for maintenance and the use of what you can have on there. That's debatable, and some people whether they value sealed or not, but again, it's something that we can talk about as a community. An amphitheatre, so that there's a bit more of a cultural hub. Hāwea used to be a place where a lot of big names used to come to the pub on the corner, and used to get quite a lot of few good acts, and so we're trying to bring that back in a way. A light industrial zone so that people have a place to work locally without having to drive anywhere, and that's again the intent, I think, is to try and get people out of their homes and into shared spaces so that you can come across each other for the well-being aspect. You can collaborate and work together rather than in isolation. And that there's space to do so. Retirement village for our elderly population, which used to be the majority, but there's quite a young population migrating here due to house prices. Dog parks are very popular. Lots of new dog owners, and just an area where you can leave a dog off a leash and feel comfortable and meet other dog owners, playground for your puppy. And looking at different forms of housing. So tiny house village was definitely on the request, and there's some advantages being that they're movable structures around, say, flood zones, because it's a bit trickier for consent-wise to build on them through council regulations, and so there poses an opportunity there to create those kinds of spaces. The Dark Sky Reserve is a big thing the community connected with, for cultural and scientific connection, and so from that we can create a lighting management plan and go through the steps and processes to get certified and protect that as an asset. Obviously playgrounds, and then front footing, transitioning sustainable energy. We have to try and address public transport on a smaller scale, and so how we do that is always very interesting. In terms of community shuttles and community vans, and kind of the frequency, the food forest, which we already have, which is just such a great asset to the town, and we can really put a lot more work in, and then co-working spaces and entrance ways. So there's a lot, and like I hate to run through it so quickly, but I guess the intent is we're trying to address every segment of what makes up a community and prioritize the social infrastructure that makes up the quality of life of living there. I think a lot of what gets forgotten about is that townships prioritize housing for obvious needs, like hierarchy of needs. You need a place to live first before you can start thinking about other things, but then often it creates a disconnect because a lot of people here, they have a house or they don't, but there isn't those communal spaces that really connect you with the residents and other people in the region. And so we're trying to find out ways to bring people together and then design in structures that facilitate those cultural well-being events and things and stuff. So yeah, that's a lot of talking without saying other stuff.
Yeah, no, nice one. That was brilliantly presented, and each aspect of that could be a conversation of its own. But the whole plan in its entirety is really complete. And what you finished on there about just really aiming to come up with something that's just like, what does a community need? And addressing each aspect of that, it's really bold and super ambitious. And I think you've done a really good job with that. So good.
I appreciate it. Yeah, I think the intention is that we're just starting the static friction, getting the ball moving, and we really want to make it a communal thing so that people feel a sense of ownership on what happens, and that this is a draft of the next 10 versions. But we're lucky enough to have this as a bottom-up approach that's supported locally, as a way of the community taking lead on what their future will look like. And I think the hard part to get over with that is just, it's somewhat unprecedented. And so there is slight condescension around, oh, this isn't how we do things. But I think a lot of people really feel connected with it as an approach, because who knows the region better than the people living in it? And they're going to the Hāwea and a lot of small towns, they rely on volunteers and locals in the community who put in a lot of work to make up what the town is. And so as it grows, you tend to kind of lose a lot of that. And so we're wanting to try and do as much as we can to make sure that we're retaining as much of that as possible. And part of that is, the culture around us taking initiative on it. So that sets precedent for people who move here, that, you have ownership over living here and what happens in the township. And there's a certain amount of citizenship that comes with that. So, sharing your time and being involved in the community in whatever way you can.
Yeah, it's great. It's just like you stated it quite well right in the first page there about the why you're doing this. And it's like, because without such a vision and without something that's created from the community, then the developers and the sort of faceless businesses that can just come in and buy up large areas and put a housing residential program or something like this in, it can just get sort of just like done, and then all of a sudden the people of that area like, oh, we didn't want that, and that's really actually influenced. And you see that all over the place. Like, I've just watched the rebuild of Christchurch and the sprawl, and that's sort of like a little bit heartless and some of the areas that's happened. And I just wonder if there's a bit more of a community input into like, well, how do we want to utilize the space surrounding the city to create houses, of course, but also that map where you've dotted all the projects, that's a really good one on there. And having a playground every so often in a food forest area and the Hāwea domain, but also the community gardens close to the township. It's just really intelligent to have that 50-year plan way out in front. So as things move into the area, it can there's oh no, this is what we want to happen in this space.
Yeah, well, I think what's been really positive about it is that the conversation has changed to, we don't want growth to, when growth happens, what can we get out of it for the community, in the respect of, there are developer contributions that happen with each section that's built. And so we're trying to direct a lot of the money and funding to make it really obvious to say, hey, the Market Square, this is where we've identified a great place for it to be. It's going to improve the livability and the quality for residents. And if you're really trying to win over people, then this is a great way that you can give something back to the community. And so it's kind of trying to create a map to work in collaboration with what's happening anyway, because I think, we don't want to be a path resistance necessarily. I think it's more just that, like you say, the lack of holistic planning or just thinking about the well-being and the long outcomes has definitely been a shortcoming for a lot of towns. And I think, that needs, we have an opportunity to set precedent for it. I think the challenge is you're constantly coming across the kind of not my backyard culture. And so a lot of people spend a lot of time trying to fight any sort of change and if fail, lose the opportunity to really implement some things that will create a better outcome for communities as it grows. And so, yeah, that's the intent at least.
I think that's a really good point. It's like, this isn't saying we don't want growth, we like don't come in here. It's just saying, if we're going to develop this area and build this township, which is likely because Hāwea is just such a beautiful lake, and the surrounds just take your breath away. So it's likely that it will develop. And instead of trying to, stand out there with placards and say, we don't want you here, it's saying, okay, we can come in, but we want to design the future that we want our grandchildren to have a beautiful place. And
yeah, I think you want to create like a culture that's obviously welcoming and diverse. And you want to set a precedent to the people who come here. You go, we take a lot of pride in the place that we are, and we're very, light on the environment as much as possible. And you can see the strong values, which, there is already that culture there, but arguably it isn't necessarily reflected in the planning. Like, we're cutting down forests to build a lot of houses, and we're not really offsetting that by planting enough natives. And there's plenty of it happening. There's a lot of work happening on the foreshore with native plantings, but I think the hope is that you come into the town and you just understand through the signage, the aesthetic, the way that the town is planned, and a lot of the things, that you just get an understanding of values, and there is this respect for the way that people live, and respect for the environment that they live in. And I think the best way you can do that is by inspiring people and leading by example. And so hopefully it can just set as a start of a map that people can integrate into, and create the best version of what we can think of. And yeah, for it to be updated. I mean, I've talked to at least 3 people who are rewriting different sections of that master plan, because they have way more expertise than Erica and I do on water quality or on, offsetting carbon emissions. And that's the intent, is that you want this to just get people excited and be like, well, I know a lot about this. And so it's like, great, let's make it yours. It's, it's all of ours in that respect. And so, yeah, hopefully people really connect with that aspect of it and feel its ownership, and feel like it's, approachable to change it into the way that they think it should be done.
Cool. Yeah, and I could imagine sort of each of those projects at the end of the document would have a community champion. I know Jake was really excited about the dog park, and you said a lot of people there'd be someone in the Hāwea community that would know exactly how to develop a dog park and how it should be managed and these things, and they would, could take up the development of that aspect of the plan.
And again, that's like identifying that we're talking about the where to put the dog park and how to build it, and we're so frustrated with the developers and or the council or whatever, so it's a much more constructive outcome when there is a community meeting. And like, from my point of view, being a young person in the district, I would much rather have more of those conversations where we're not battling against people, but we're really just we're trying to be productive and constructive as much as possible. And yeah, also trying to accept and be pragmatic around the things that need to happen. Is obviously affordable housing crisis, and a lot of people wanting to have a sense of ownership in the local township. So we've got to make space to ensure that we can still get a diverse amount of people, and that people can come live here from any walks of life. And then, yeah, kind of taking the initiative on the long-term outcomes and improving their well-being of life while they're here.
Part of what strikes me as so cool about this is the integration into the landscape of your mapping process. And it's really taking in the form with the floodplains, and these are the fertile soils, and this is the area that might be a bit stonier, so we'll get carried on with that V with the urban zone. And it's just nice. It's really taking a natural perspective and using Earth's lens, as like asking the Earth, what does she want to be developed in these places, and considering what is the best practice.
Absolutely. And think that, sorry, carry on. To Erica's credit, very great at not trying to change a landscape too much, as you say, and there's trying to figure out what the natural boundaries are, and identifying those opportunities. Because a lot of times we talked about green connections or green belts, and they were formed in old railways or other areas that aren't used for anything else. And so we're like, well, what are the abilities that we have? What are the things that we can't change? And then how can we do that? Another aspect to this, which I forgot to mention, was that we have our river flowing through here, and this the intent was also with the floodplain that there was soakable borders, so that the stormwater runoff would run into an area that was captured by a lot of native plantings. We had riparian plantings for the natives down the riverbed, so that you kind of front footing that stormwater conversation and talking about water quality. And so a lot of those things are integrated into those stars, as well as the social aspect.
Cool. We were lucky enough to have Finn Ross speak at this year's Future Whenua Summit, and he spoke about a number of the things he's up to personally, but also touched on their family farm, Lake Hāwea Station, which sort of manages the land surrounding about a quarter, maybe a third of Lake Hāwea. And I know they've got a large restoration and native planting scheme going on along the sort of foreshore that they manage. And it just made me wonder about a lot of the land where that map is farmland currently. And so what might it look like to that farmer to sort of have, was there consulting with him, or who actually does own that land, and what might it look like as it transitions from, an irrigated dairy farm, I believe, to what that's showing there?
Yeah, I think that's part of, there wasn't much consultation with the local farmers. I think a lot of people that you kind of talk to, you can't do that because, this person owns this, and you have to talk to that. And you realize that it's hard to have vision if you're trying to keep everybody happy and just think about what's there now. And so the direction that we took was more, well, let's just, if it was all publicly owned, or say no one owned anything, there's no constraints, what would be the right way to do it, and then work from there, I guess, because it's hard to have a conversation with people to try and show them what it could be when they've spent their whole lives looking at what it is. And so it's not until you really connect all of the pieces and create a holistic vision that they can really understand the intent and the value of the community doing this. Is that we're not doing this to make any money or to, capitalize on the land that's available. There's no incentive other than just to create what we hope is the best outcome that's in respect to the environment, and that is pragmatic for people who live there, and as a light touch as possible. And so I've talked to Finn actually recently about all of the work that they've been doing, and he's someone who's going to be probably more actively involved with the floodplain aspect, calculating the carbon that we need to offset as a town, and how we can get funding to actually plant a lot of this area in natives. And I think that's kind of just front footing what's already going to happen anyway through local government and carbon credits and the kind of lens that we're moving into with taking a much more strong stance on climate change, which I found in my own experience that, you tend to value the independence of being slightly off the grid and having growing your own food and living with a light touch on the environment. And then time tends to prove those ideals in terms of when things get hard and you've still got a veggie garden, then it tends to work out for you. So I think a lot of this, we'll see it become much more economically viable in future. And again, the better we can create a town that is more connected, I feel like it's just let's be win-win, hopefully. I don't think we're trying to work against anybody in that respect. So,
yeah. Full respect to that process as well. It's just you could get really tied up in the current reality and what's possible, and if you sort of set yourself constraints at the vision stage, then you're not going to get as pure of a vision as what you've come out with. And like you also said, it's this is iteration 1, and there might be 10 throughout time.
Yeah.
So these things would model when all of a sudden you've got something to actually have the conversation with the farmer about and say, how would you feel, or what's your succession plan, and
Yeah.
the conversations can be based around something that has some form already and already has some engagement with the community, and the task force has developed that vision. And there's a lot that you've got to work with already, which is really cool. Yeah, like Finn will be a real asset. He knows the carbon markets and just that world as well as anyone I know. And there's also in that agricultural zone, Lincoln University research farm. So they're doing various trials, and I know Lake Hāwea Station's just an absolute leader in the regenerative agriculture space. So it's a good foundation to start from, and also some of the cultural aspects. And Hāwea Flat, I mentioned a couple of my sort of guerrilla gardener mates, and there's people living in tiny homes and yurts and buses, and it was cool to see that as part of your long-term plan, because we can really minimize the demand on resources if we start to build our infrastructure on a more minimalist mindset. And that's already been exhibited well in Hāwea Flat, and people are sort of living, what could be called a hippie life, but it's, I just go there and I see people that are really happy, and I see a lot of community gatherings and people that are connected in such a way that I think deep down all of us know that's something that we both want to and need to revert to as a culture, and it can be just a little omitted from a lot of aspects of sort of New Zealand society and other townships. So you've got a strong base on those different fronts to work on.
Absolutely. I think it's quite exciting to be part of an initiative that's hopefully going to bring people together and bring, a lot of the expertise and intelligence and hard work of locals to give them a platform to utilize that, and in a way that makes it really easy for them to give back to the community. And a lot of the stuff with like the growth and what we've identified is far beyond what most people would consider adequate for the next 50 years. I think the intent is that if we way overdo it, then, bringing it back into staging processes is still going to have a great outcome, but it's we've at least got a plan for it regardless. And we can kind of dissect it into smaller chunks as we get into more detail and define it a bit more. So yeah, I mean, a large part of my intent of getting more involved with community stuff was, identifying the importance of being well connected and in the community, and noticing that we're becoming a more isolated society, with myself working from home for the last, I'd say, 5 years. And then, starting to move into supermarkets, delivering online. My brother drives the truck for Countdown, and so soon enough we're not really going to have many reasons to leave the house. And I think part of that is as hard as where do you intersect with people, because it's that kind of, we've all experienced with isolation is not really the best thing for us. As you say, there's that human aspect. And so forecasting if we are or working remotely to diversify the primary industries and give us, better paid and jobs in a remote region, then what are the things that we're going to need for our well-being and able to do that? And so, yeah, things like co-working spaces and market squares and food forests and areas where we can spend time, and it's not necessarily for economic benefit. I think that's the other hard part, is that you kind of pushing uphill constantly because people go, well, why? Who's making money out of it? Or, is it just another thing that we have to look after or pay for on rates? So yeah, there's a lot of conversations to be had around value structure and the amount of space that we've dedicated for social infrastructure versus the actual housing and commercial infrastructure is something that's been contested before. But I think it brings to light a lot of the conversations around those values and around how we can retain a sense of community and actually enrich it, rather than it kind of disappearing with growth in the region.
Yeah. It's super difficult, eh? You're developing, working with the human element, and as this thing goes from plan into more like we're trying to enact it, there'll be a lot of contention. And I wonder if there's any sort of plan on how would you resolve with, you know, people within the community that hold different values. You know, someone coming from the more capitalist, we need to make money from this land to pay for other stuff, and someone that's more like, we just want to live good lives and you know, nurture our in ourselves, and maybe there's a decision, one would go one way, one would go the other. How might those sort of things be resolved?
I feel like I've been learning a lot about how to try and get involvement. I was thinking recently about looking into other areas, like, for example, community consultation. You often get the same voices involved, and so you kind of hear one side of the view. And so I looked into kind of what other people can do, and like the justice system takes in like a jury, so you get a random selection of the community, and so that cross section can then have like a say whether or not they'd never been involved before, because I feel like there's a silent majority and a vocal minority, and it's hard to represent as a leader in the area. Everybody, or not feeling like you're getting everybody's involvement. You know, like a lot of people are doing their own lives, and so this is kind of like last in the agenda. And yeah, but in terms of like directing a lot of that, I think again, just through community consultation and as much like conversation as possible, so that people are all well heard and respected, and that different views are shared, and that we retain a good sense of diversity in the people that are here. And that, yeah, there is always compromise. Like, you've got to have a bit of give and take and acknowledge different agendas and priorities and needs. So that's, we've tried to retain a space many people to change it when it's wrong. You know, it's just of many, like we say, but I think the important part is that we're starting the ball rolling. We're better, and hopefully this gives you some ideas on, you know, if it triggers you, then you go, great, well, come show us how to do it, kind of thing, you know. So hopefully that creates a better outcome in terms of, rather than having those divisive conversations around two different values or ideologies, that they're more focused on a constructive outcome, or braided by talking to be objective rather than the personality. So yeah.
The Hāwea domain was one of the interesting topics during the workshop, the public workshop that I attended, and it was just seemed like a really exciting opportunity, for one, because there is a 10-year-old food forest there, and so that's quite a rare thing to have so many trees already established, and just a bit of a workings of a community garden to grow from. But it is also a very large area that's set aside for the community. And just on that line you were talking about, it would be like, what, you know, Tun was saying, oh, I could you know, unpack his geodome and go put up there and put an art studio. I could do this tomorrow. But then it was sort of like, oh, Tun, like, can you actually just go and do that? And so yeah, like how would someone, you know, give and contribute, let's say in the context of the domain, but not be overstepping any boundaries?
So I think, like in the food forest, they're talking about allotments in terms of having a certain size or an area that's theirs, that they rent and use, versus what's shared space. So we can identify what's for the use case for it. I guess the domain is like, I guess because it's such a large space, we have an area to do a lot of different things. So it doesn't have to be dedicated for just sports fields and just a race course or just a centre, whatever. So I'm unsure around the responsibility or liability of, you know, like who says, yes, this can go here and this can't. But yeah, I think like hopefully it's as open-minded as possible for as long as possible, because I'd like to just trial things for a little bit and then see how it works. I think my wife's talking with locals around how to get a co-working space and just use what we have, get people involved, charge them next to nothing, and just see how it goes. We're currently doing a public transport trial through Link Upper Clutha, which is starting next week, and it's $2 to do it. So like the intent isn't to charge people, it's just to let's try it out and do it and see what happens, because action creates information. And then, you know, once we do it, then we can say this doesn't work and this does. And so we're kind of in that space where we probably get to be a bit more creative and experimental around what happens there. And I'd like to see people acting with it as much as long as they're open-minded with it changing, basically. And yeah.
Cool. The 50-year plan and the rationale behind that, I liked what you said about sometimes you can do it a bit short, and 30 years could sort of flick by when it comes to the context of this scale of plan. Could you just elaborate on that, like what, setting it further back, the longer term vision? What was the sort of thinking going behind that?
I think mainly it gives us creativity, because if you say 20 years, a lot of people can go, oh, well, we've got this thing coming up in the next 5 and then 10, and, like it just won't work. But if you say 50, then you go, well, most of us are going to be like dead or super old. And so it's a really different timescale to play in. And I think that allows you to be a bit more ambitious around how things are. And in order to do the linkage of the floodplain, for example, you would need the support and the funding of like more ratepayers. And so you'd have to grow that. And it's not necessarily, we'd have to stage it from certain areas. So I think it's mainly audacious and to be grand and unrestricted. And will then go down, think big and then refine, rather than start with restrictions, like we say before, and then certainly in the back of your mind, kind of burdened by what's there. And so that was the intent. Also, I don't know if we can really forecast what's going to happen in 100 years, looking just as technology evolves. I think we're trying to front foot cultural adoptions of how the economy is changing with, brick and mortar stores not being so essential, and the internet allowing people to live and work in much more remote places, and the issues that we'll have around climate and energy and those kinds of things. Trying to address that, but beyond 50 years, it's it could be a completely different ball game, and no one knows what's going to happen. So it's about as far out as we can go without honestly saying that there's too many fundamentals that we just couldn't forecast in order to plan properly for it.
Yeah, cool. And it definitely seems, looking at the list of the projects you've got proposed there, that those are pretty future-proof things that you want to develop. The marketplace and the centre square, and these are things that will be timeless assets to any community, I'm sure. And I know what you're saying also about just Rob and I are blue sky thinkers and very ambitious, and sometimes we'll be on a call and trying to tell the story of some project we're working on, or a particular venture, and we get into the impact it can have on civilization or something, and you sort of see their eyes glaze over. So giving it that this is the plan for 50 years, it sort of just gives a bit of a buffer for those that might have more restricted views on reality.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, you do kind of push past the conservative ideologies in a little bit, because it is quite freeing as a designer myself. It's much more interesting prospect than like you say, the big thinking rather than the small. So what's interesting as well, I think, the longevity aspect, like you say, I think a lot of these communal spaces can make or break a town. I think, it's hard to establish in hindsight, and that's kind of the value where we're at is, I always looked at Central Park in New York, where there was a huge large area that was protected from the most dense urban cities that exist. And so it takes an enormous amount of foresight and protection retain that over such a long period. And so I was always an admirer of that aspect of things, where he just had great foresight and grand vision. And because of that, because of trying to look after people in 50 years and ensure that they have a really good quality of life, then you're able to do really important things that withstand a lot of the years of criticism and the change of government and leadership and other stuff. I mean, we're still kind of utilizing unformed legal roads or paper roads that people had put in decades ago, and I kind of like that. And the trees on the foreshore of Lake Wanaka and that have been planted 50, 60, 70 years ago, only to be enjoyed now. So I think a lot of people that connect with this intent kind of connect with that long-term vision and outcome that is really a legacy in some respect to what they want to leave behind for future generations.
Awesome. You're a local councillor, and or at least you're involved in local council, and I was just wondering if you'd care to give a quick foray into your experience thus far, because you're quite young, I'd assume, in your 20s, and there's not a lot of people in their 20s in local council. So I was just wondering, like, what sort of got you in there, the rationale there again, and also what's the process been like, and do you feel like your time is well spent by taking that path?
Yeah. So I'm not yet in local council. I'm campaigning at the moment for the elections, and for a lot of the intent was just a lack of representation of younger people and younger voices, and also obviously Hāwea being the smallest town of like the Queenstown Lakes region, and so a lot of the stuff that we're trying to do is coming across big barriers around how the system works, and so always kind of like I'd rather just put my hand up and help change things than complain about it. So if there are barriers, then, kind of go headfirst into them. And so those are some of the fundamental reasons why I stood forward this year to run for council. And I've definitely found it like tricky in respect of finding the time between, surviving here, working, I was working more full-time and working part-time now, to make space for it all. And I think I was lucky enough to be in a position where we built a house a couple of years ago, and, like in a stable career that has flexibility to allow me to start thinking about these larger needs and ideals. And so I feel like it's a privilege that I have to be in a position to be concerned by this stuff. And so I kind of see the responsibility, therefore, to be a representative for people who don't have the time to put their effort into this kind of stuff, and who need somebody their own age or around their own age to help represent their views. It's working within the system that we have and trying to be a more representative role than the governance, and then also trying to fight for the well-being and ensure equity and diversity and all the things, to create a better outcome, basically. I grew up in Wanaka, and so I had a long-standing connection to the place and to the town and to the people, and I struggle a lot with the idea that it's an exclusive place that shouldn't be affordable, and that, a lot of people will spend a lot of their life somewhere else to then sell up in retirement. And so the decisions that are made are in the benefit of people who are there to spend their last years enjoying it. And so often that's to the detriment of the young people trying to build a life here. And so, it just needs a diverse representation. And it's kind of the point of council being a collective rather than, a single representative, is that there are a lot of people at the table who all kind of respectfully disagree or, can share a different side of the coin.
Yeah, awesome. Well said, and admirable that you're stepping up and dedicating your time to that. So, have you studied politics or have some background in that to lead you there?
No, I think it is hard because it's such a a different thing from design, but I mean, part of it, a lot of it is still design. I mean, I learned at uni to how to collaborate and communicate, and the importance of critical thinking, and the value of being curious and not going into something with conviction. I think that's a lot of the trouble that I'm coming across, is that there's this expectation that you should know everything, and so a lot of people kind of stick to an idea and then they feel like it's a weakness to give up on it and to change. And I think that's a danger, because, like if there's new, better information, then we have to kind of move and flow with it. And a creative person is going to find that a lot easier, being that I remember my first year of uni, they basically, no matter what you did, they shat on it. And so the last few weeks you were at, a blank page again. And they were basically just teaching you, your first ideas are going to be crap, and there's going to be a lot of waffle to get out before you really get to the really interesting parts. And so that design process, I think, is still really present in everything else that we do. So local government should be like that. We should start saying stuff, and we'll end up being wrong like most of the time. And the longer we work on it, I think the more inventive the ideas will be. And so I think it's really important to have a design background. The political stuff, I'm learning a lot on the job. I had I've had other people in politics passively, without feeling the need to get involved. But I guess the times kind of like spoke to me in the respect of, if not me and who kind of aspect. And I figured everyone else is trying to figure this out as we go along. And politics should just be a representative of the community. So it shouldn't be well-studied politicians necessarily, because maybe that's not the best people who represent the needs and wants of the communities.
Fantastic. Well said again. And yeah, that's partly what I was prompting it to, like, to step up and put your hand up for a leadership role and a role in politics. It doesn't take that background. It takes a vision. It takes some courage and energy to put towards, but it doesn't require that background. You can go as you are, and that will aid the political process, because it does require diversity. So good stuff there. I just want to finish on, how could a township anywhere, let's say Riversdale, and they're like, oh yeah, this is a beautiful. We've got the Matilda River. We can imagine this growing and developing in the next 50 years. Maybe Riversdale is not the best example, but what would the process be like for someone to step up and say, hey, we don't want to just do a whole big suburban sprawl across our urban, a nice landscape. We want to do something that's going to fulfill deeper desires of how to live in this land. What does that look like? What advice would you have to start that journey?
I can only speak to how we did it. Obviously, we did it through shaping our futures, but I would say confidence is key. I think part of it is like, just pretend you have the authority to do so, and just start without really any expectations, and see how much momentum you can build. Because I feel like I didn't really come into this like community work intending to be a part of designing the whole township. It's just kind of one of those things that evolves. And so taking ownership and starting is like the big aspect, and getting the ball moving and connecting in with your local councils and government, and just trying to build a movement so that other people feel like it's just the thing that's happening. I think that's been one of the biggest learning curves, is kind of the whole fake it till you make it, in the respect of, well, why can't we do this stuff? So long as we're pragmatic and we're trying to integrate it within other people, I think if we can bring people along and inspire other people to be more involved, then you'll be surprised how far you can get. And local government's there to represent you, and so there's a certain point where, at the moment with elections, you can kind of get those people involved. All the candidates for mayor and councillors came to that event that you were at with the Lake Hāwea and Hāwea Flat Master Planning, and so they've all stood up and said that, yeah, this is bottom up stuff we believe in and we want to support. So that kind of made them accountable for this kind of way forward. I think a lot of it is just people not like the barrier, I guess, is that people don't feel like it's their right to decide on what happens. And I think so long as you're open-minded and you're doing it for the right reasons, I think you can build so much momentum, and that can then influence development of things, and it can then influence spatial plans and local legislation. But as kind of tired and typical as it sounds, it is just like a little bit at a time and trying to build momentum more than anything.
Cool, man. Cool. It's inspiring, and I would encourage anyone listening to this that has such an idea. You don't have to come up with a master plan and take it to council or anything. Try and sketch out some ideas, and maybe get on Google Maps and just think about what would be good for this area. What's our township lacking, and maybe do a print off and do a drawing. It's fun to do that, even as a creative process. And just lastly, getting from the next steps, the implementation. How does this go from master plan to master township? What's
Well, like I said, we don't know necessarily what we're doing. I don't know if we're not following any guidelines. I think what we're trying to do is just keep the momentum and keep the accountability. And so we've been working a lot recently with local developers on how we can offset contributions in order to, so like the more development that does happen, we go, hey, great, we need a market square, and we need a dog park, and we're becoming a much more specified voice in terms of it's constructive conversations that are happening that are creating more social and communal infrastructure. If we're pragmatic around growth, and it's seemingly successful to integrate that when there's an agenda of other people to try and build other stuff. So we're working within the confines and trying to just collaborate as much as possible to get little wins. It's not that we're holding anyone hostage about this is what you have to do. It's hard enough standing up for this plan and not being, in the condescending conversations where they try and go, well, they're not going to make your dream vision of the town happen. It's like, I don't need the whole thing to happen. I just need one little piece at a time, and however way that works and gets shaped. But it's progress nonetheless. And I think, anything that we can kind of make progress towards is good.
Fantastic, man. Well, I've really enjoyed your presentation and this conversation. It truly is a master plan, and I hope it manifests into reality over the next 50 years. And I hope you get into council.
Thank you. I appreciate your support and enthusiasm, and having you involved. And thank you very much for having me. Appreciate it a lot.
Cool. Well, I hope everyone's enjoyed listening to this, and until next time, go keep it.